Captain Rin Tavers, came a voice that sounded like gravel wrapped in silk. Why do I feel like I'm about to regret this? Rin didn't bother to turn around. The viewport of the Aegis offered her a view of Earth that was, depressingly, the only blue thing in this universe worth looking at. Probably because you're right, she replied, the dry humor evident even in her resigned tone. It's the Zorathians. They've shown up. Lieutenant Corin Shaw, a man gifted with the rare talent of functionally communicating in sarcasm, leaned against the tactical display. The Zorathians, huh? Here to grace us with their wisdom and underwhelming charisma, no doubt. Rin smirked, her face a map of battles won, each scar a landmark. Well, they did say they'd come in peace. Peace, Corin echoed, his voice thick with disbelief. That's what they said about instant coffee, and look how that turned out. She chuckled darkly. Right, though to be fair, I don't think anyone died from it. Yet. The bridge of the Aegis was a cacophony of controlled chaos, where officers barked commands and information flew faster than bad news in a small town. Captain, came the clipped, professional tone of Ensign Harlow, who had the unfortunate distinction of being the most competent and least appreciated member of the crew. The Zorathian delegation is requesting permission to dock. Rin sighed, running a hand through her hair like she was hoping to find a hidden escape route. Granted. And make sure the welcome mat doesn't have "go home" embroidered on it this time. The crew snapped into action, though with the enthusiasm of prisoners digging their own graves. The Aegis was a fortress ship, a juggernaut of human engineering meant to intimidate and, if necessary, obliterate any unfriendly visitors. It was as welcoming as a punch to the face when it came to diplomacy. You know, Corin said, a wicked glint in his eye, maybe they'll bring snacks. Rin snorted. If their food is anything like their sense of timing, we'll be lucky if we survive it. Moments later, the Zorathian ship docked with a clunk that spoke not of precision, but the kind of grace one expected from a drunken elephant. The airlock hissed open, and 3 Zorathians glided in, tall, willowy figures with skin the shade of neglected gravestones. Greetings, said the lead Zorathian, his voice like a well-mannered coffin creaking open. I am Ambassador G.R. Kaelth. We bring tidings of friendship. His pronunciation made friendship sound like a particularly exotic disease. Rin stepped forward, a diplomatic smile plastered on her face like cheap wallpaper. Welcome aboard the Aegis, Ambassador. I'm Captain Rin Tavers. She motioned towards Corin. And this is Lieutenant Shaw, our cultural liaison. Corin's eyebrows shot up. Since when am I a cultural liaison? Since 5 seconds ago, Rin said through her smile. Congratulations. G.R. Kaelth bowed, his movements as fluid and awkward as spilled soup. We appreciate the hospitality of your fortress. We aim to please, Rin replied, knowing full well their aim was generally more about shooting things until they stopped moving. As a gesture of goodwill, G.R. Kaelth continued, we have brought a selection of traditional Zorathian delicacies. Oh joy, Corin muttered, eyeing the container that looked suspiciously like it might contain the remains of someone's last bad decision. G.R. Kaelth opened the container with a flourish, revealing an assortment of things. They were green, gelatinous, and jiggled with suggestive enthusiasm. Corin peered at the offering, his face scrunched in revulsion. You know, he said, in some cultures, it's considered polite to cook food before you eat it. The ambassador blinked slowly, a gesture that could have meant anything from confusion to a desire to murder everyone in the room. These are best appreciated in their natural state. Rin, ever the courageous leader, decided the best course of action was distraction. While we figure out the logistics of sharing your culinary treasures, perhaps you'd like a tour of our ship, she gestured grandly, like a magician unveiling her next trick. A splendid idea, G.R. Kaelth agreed, though his tone suggested he thought the idea was merely passable. As the group moved down the corridors of the Aegis, Rin couldn't help but admire, begrudgingly, the human's ability to maintain decorum in the face of what could only be described as a diplomatic disaster in progress. What do you think they eat when they're not trying to poison potential allies? Corin whispered, his eyes darting around as if expecting the walls to start perspiring with green goo. Rin shrugged. Probably each other. The tour proceeded with the enthusiasm of a condemned man walking to the gallows. Each station they visited met with nods of feigned interest from the Zorathians. It was during a particularly dull explanation of the ship's life support systems that the real fun began. "Captain," came Harlow's voice over the comm, laced with the kind of urgency that usually preceded explosions. "We've got a situation in the mess hall." Rin's heart sank. "Define situation," she said, even though she knew she'd regret it. "The Zorathian food," Harlow continued, each word a nail in Rin's coffin of optimism. "It's not agreeing with the crew." Rin exchanged a look with Corin, who was failing miserably to suppress a grin. "Define not agreeing. They're either violently ill or violently hungry for more," Harlow said, clearly enjoying the chaos from a safe distance. Rin sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that could deflate a small planet. "We'll be right there." Turning to the Zorathians, Rin plastered another smile on her face. "Perhaps you'd like to see our culinary facilities next." Gr. Kael'th inclined his head. "Yes, food is a universal language, is it not?" "Oh, it's something universal, all right," Rin muttered under her breath. The mess hall was a scene straight out of a particularly hellish painting. Crew members were doubled over, some groaning, others laughing maniacally, all with a slight green tinge that suggested they might be in the early stages of turning into zombies. "This," Corin said, gesturing expansively, "is why you always read the ingredients." Rin marched over to the nearest crew member, a young technician who looked like he was caught between an exorcism and a very bad trip. "What happened?" "They told us it was a delicacy," the technician wheezed, clutching his stomach. "Tastes like someone vomited up a rainbow." Gr. Kael'th stepped forward, a picture of alien innocence. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Rin turned, her smile now something cold and dangerous. "Your delicacies seem to have had an unexpected effect on my crew." The ambassador tilted his head, a gesture that might have been concern or curiosity. "Our food is only dangerous if consumed in excessive quantities." "Define excessive," Corin demanded, his curiosity piqued in the way a cat is piqued by a laser pointer. "More than half a portion," Gr. Kael'th replied, as if this were obvious. Rin fought the urge to facepalm. "Half a portion, you serve them enough to feed a small army." "Ah," Gr. Kael'th said, a note of realization in his voice. "That explains much." Rin took a deep, calming breath, the kind you'd need before disarming a nuclear bomb. "How do we fix this?" Gr. Kael'th pondered this for a moment. "Time will heal them, or possibly a brisk walk through a decompression chamber," Corin snorted. "I vote option 2. Rin shot him a look that could melt steel. "Let's avoid unnecessary depressurization on deck, shall we?" "As you wish," Gr. Kael'th said, the alien equivalent of a shrug. Rin decided it was time to assert some human superiority, in the only way she knew how, by taking control of the situation and making sure no one else died of diplomatic indigestion. "All right, folks," she called out to her suffering crew, "no more alien food. Anyone caught eating it will be confined to quarters until they can prove they're not a danger to themselves or the plumbing." "And to think," Corin mused as they watched the chaos unfold, "some people say space is boring." Rin chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "If this keeps up, we might just have to start a new intergalactic sport." The ambassador nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Perhaps our cultures are more alike than different." "Let's hope," Rin replied, "because if not, I don't think our digestive systems are going to survive this alliance." The mess hall of the Aegis was now a battlefield of a different variety. It seemed the Zorathian delicacies were staging a revolt from within. Crew members were either sprawled on the floor in pain or clinging to any available surface as they rediscovered the joys of reverse digestion. "Well," Rin observed, surveying the scene with the practiced dismay of someone who's been here before, "this is a shit show." Corin, leaning against the wall with the casual elegance of a man who knows exactly how little he can do to help, nodded sagely. "Remember when we thought space diplomacy would be boring?" "No," Rin replied, "but I remember thinking it couldn't be worse than a Zorathian cookbook." Amidst the chaos, a familiar face appeared. Engineer Lyra Kale, a wiry woman with perpetually oil-stained fingers and a penchant for the impossible, shouldered her way through the groaning crowd. "Captain," she said, her voice a mix of determination and exasperation, "we need to fix this before the whole crew ends up on the wrong side of a toilet." Rin nodded, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Got any bright ideas, Lyra? Because so far, all I've got is the desire to jettison our guests along with their culinary atrocities." Lyra crossed her arms, a smudge of grease on her cheek like a battle scar. "I might have something. We could synthesize a food substitute compatible with both human and Zorathian biology. It's risky, but it beats watching our crew puke themselves inside out." Corin quipped from his perch, "Risky. That's practically our brand now, right?" With a resigned sigh, Rin gestured towards the door. "All right, let's see what you've got, Kale. But if this backfires, I'm holding you personally responsible for cleaning up the mess." "Wouldn't be the first time," Lyra replied, her grin filled with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that usually preceded explosions. They navigated through the ship's corridors, the air heavy with the scent of stale sweat and regret. Lyra led them to the engineering bay, a cavernous space filled with machinery that hummed ominously, as if warning them against hope. Lyra pulled up a display, her fingers flying across the console with the precision of a surgeon performing a particularly delicate operation. "I figure we can reverse engineer the Zorathian food, isolate what's causing the problem, and manufacture something that won't kill us." Rin nodded, more to herself than anyone else. "Just as long as it doesn't involve more gelatinous monstrosities." "Fingers crossed," Lyra said, though her voice suggested that crossing fingers might be about as effective as praying to the vacuum of space. As they watched Lyra work, Corin leaned in close to Rin, his voice low. "You know, if this works, she'll expect a raise." "If we survive this," Rin replied dryly, "I'll throw in a medal and a week off." The engineering team sprang into action, their movements choreographed chaos. They worked with the frenetic energy of people who knew their lives depended on the outcome, and who had perhaps drunk a bit too much coffee. Hours passed, each minute dragging by with all the grace of a drunken bantha. The tension was a living thing, thickening the air until it was hard to breathe. Finally, Lyra stepped back, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. "All right, I think we've got something. It's not gourmet, but it should be edible." Corin peered at the concoction, a nondescript paste that looked like the result of a culinary dare gone wrong. "Looks like something the cat dragged in," he noted. "Funny," Lyra retorted, "because it's supposed to taste like chicken." Rin took a cautious sniff. It didn't smell like much, which was probably a blessing. "Let's test it on someone expendable." Corin raised an eyebrow. "Where do we find someone like that, given we're all stuck on this flying fortress together?" Before Rin could answer, Ensign Harlow appeared, conveniently timed as usual. "Captain, we've got a situation brewing with the Zorathians. They're demanding a progress report on our cultural exchange." Rin sighed, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders like an uninvited guest. "Tell them we're working on a solution. Meanwhile, someone get this paste tested. I want to know if it'll save us or send us on a one-way trip to the infirmary." Harlow nodded, taking a sample with the air of someone who very much wished they were somewhere else. "I'll get right on that, Captain." As Harlow disappeared back into the chaos, Rin turned to Corin and Lyra. "All right, let's see how this plays out. And if anyone asks, we'll just say it's a new form of diplomacy." In the hours that followed, the mood aboard the Aegis shifted from chaos to cautious optimism. Harlow reported back with news that the synthesized food paste was, miraculously, safe for consumption. The crew began to stabilize, their skin losing the sickly green tint that had become disturbingly common. Rin was in the middle of contemplating the merits of getting through a diplomatic apocalypse without anyone dying when Ambassador Gr. Kael'th requested another meeting. It was the kind of request that suggested he had no idea how close he'd come to being ejected into space. The Zorathians arrived on the bridge with the same unsettling grace as before. Gr. Kael'th, his pale skin an ironic reflection of the crew's recent pallor, inclined his head politely. "Captain, we wish to address the recent complications." Rin met his gaze, steel in her eyes and a smile that was more teeth than warmth. "Yes, about that. I trust you realize your delicacies nearly turned our crew into a science experiment gone wrong." Gr. Kael'th nodded, his expression unreadable. "It was not our intention to cause harm. We assumed your people shared our resilience. Well, we're not exactly known for our tolerance of death traps disguised as hors d'oeuvres," Corin added helpfully. The ambassador seemed to consider this, his head tilting in that peculiar way of his. "I apologize, Captain. Is there a way we might rectify this misstep?" Rin resisted the urge to suggest an airlock tour. "We've found a solution," she said instead. "Our engineer has concocted something that should satisfy both our species. Though, full disclosure, it's not winning any culinary awards." Gr. Kael'th's expression shifted slightly, a hint of curiosity breaking through his stoic facade. "I would like to sample this creation." Lyra, who had been lurking at the back of the bridge, stepped forward with a container of the paste. "Here you go," she said, offering it with the casual air of someone handing out cyanide capsules. Gr. Kael'th took the container, inspecting it with the care one might reserve for a live grenade. He took a tentative taste, his expression shifting through several shades of alien incomprehension before settling into something resembling approval. "Remarkable," he intoned, though his voice carried the enthusiasm of a man receiving a tax audit. Rin allowed herself a small smile. "Glad you like it, Ambassador. Perhaps now we can move forward with our discussions without further incident." "Indeed," Gr. Kael'th replied, his demeanor once again composed. "Our alliance remains important to us, Captain. It is vital that we learn from one another." Corin leaned in, whispering to Rin, "Let's hope what we learn doesn't involve more food poisoning." Rin chuckled softly, though her eyes remained fixed on the Zorathians. "We'll take it one disaster at a time." As the ambassador and his entourage departed, Rin turned to her crew, a rare moment of relief washing over her. "All right, folks, let's keep this ship running and our guests entertained. And for the love of all things recycled, keep your fingers out of the Zorathian cookie jar." With the crisis somewhat averted, the crew returned to their stations, each person moving with the cautious optimism of survivors who knew all too well that peace was often a prelude to the next catastrophe. Rin watched them go, her mind already turning to the next challenge. She knew better than to believe their troubles were over, but for now she'd take the small victories where she could find them. Beside her, Corin stretched, his movements loose and easy. "So, Captain, what's next on our intergalactic menu?" Rin shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Survival, Lieutenant." Just survival. The bridge hummed around them, a symphony of quiet chaos and tenuous calm. In the vast emptiness of space, there was always another storm on the horizon. But for now, they were ready, or as ready as they could be with a belly full of dubious paste and a ship full of questionable allies. "To survival," Corin echoed, clinking an imaginary glass in the air. Rin nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond. "To survival," she agreed. And with that, they turned their attention back to the business of life, precariously balanced on the edge of the universe. The mess hall, with its metallic clinking and persistent hum of recycled air, was slowly returning to its usual state of organized chaos. The crew, now armed with Lyra's culinary ceasefire paste, were cautiously optimistic for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Optimism on the Aegis was as rare as a functional coffee maker. Unfortunately, optimism had a short shelf life. Just as Captain Rin Tavers was beginning to enjoy the faintest glimmer of peace, the intercom crackled to life with all the subtlety of a stiletto to the ribs. It was Dr. Tomlin Argus, the ship's medic and resident harbinger of bad news. Captain Tavers, this is Argus. We have a situation down here in the infirmary. I suggest you bring a mop. Rin sighed into her lukewarm coffee, the kind that could peel paint from the walls but somehow kept the crew awake. Acknowledged, Argus. I'll bring the whole damn janitorial squad if I have to. She rose from her well-worn chair, the leather groaning under the strain of yet another reluctant shift. Corin with me. Let's see what disaster Argus has cobbled together this time. Corin peeled himself away from the tactical display, a permanent fixture in his life, and fell into step beside Rin. I'm betting it's not just another outbreak of space flu, he commented, his voice a dry drawl. With Argus, it's never that simple, Rin replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience. If it were, he wouldn't have called me. They traversed the corridors, their footsteps echoing with the rhythm of impending doom. The infirmary loomed ahead, its sterile lights casting a surgical pallor over everything. They entered to find Argus, a man whose bedside manner could curdle milk, hunched over a terminal. "What have you got for us, Doc?" Rin asked, surveying the room with the wariness of someone expecting an ambush. Argus turned, his eyes shadowed with the kind of perpetual fatigue that came from years of saving people from their own idiocy. "The Zorathians are sick," he announced, like he'd been waiting all day to drop that bomb. Rin exchanged a glance with Corin. "Sick as in?" "As in our miracle food paste. It turns out it doesn't sit well with our guests," Argus explained, his tone as dry as a Martian desert. "They're reacting to some biochemical anomaly in our food." "Lovely," Corin muttered, folding his arms. "First we get poisoned, now we're the poison. It's like a cosmic joke and we're the punchline." Argus continued, unfazed. "I've isolated the substance causing the reaction. Something in Earth's biology that's harmless to us but toxic to them." "Any idea how we fix it?" Rin asked, her patience wearing thinner than ionized air. Argus shrugged, a gesture that conveyed a lifetime of resigned exasperation. "We could try filtering it out, but it's not going to be easy. It's woven into the very fabric of our food." Rin pinched the bridge of her nose, a habit that did nothing to alleviate the headache building behind her eyes. "And if we don't, they'll keep getting sicker," Argus stated flatly. "And I'm pretty sure the Zorathians won't take kindly to cultural exchanges that involve slow poisoning." "Great," Rin said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Just what we need, an interstellar incident caused by lunch." Corin whistled low, leaning against the door frame. "Think they'll still want to share their recipes after this?" "Only if they want revenge," Rin replied, her voice dark with humor. "All right, Argus, keep working on a solution. We'll try to keep our guests alive long enough to figure this out." Leaving the infirmary, Rin and Corin found themselves back in the corridor, the weight of the situation hanging over them like a storm cloud. "You know what this means, right?" Corin said, his tone light despite the gravity of their predicament. Rin raised an eyebrow. "That we're doomed to forever be the galaxy's premier food critics." "Besides that," Corin chuckled, "it means we have to tell our favorite alien ambassador that their introduction to human cuisine has been a bit more lethal than intended." Rin rubbed her temples, already imagining the diplomatic fallout. "Fantastic. Our first real foray into intergalactic relations, and we're accidentally committing genocide through gastronomy." "At least they're not big on suing," Corin offered. "Small mercies," Rin replied, her voice dry as bone. "Let's get this over with." Back on the bridge, the atmosphere was charged with the kind of tension that made people jittery and prone to staring at screens as if they might spontaneously combust. Rin strode to the communications console, signaling the Zorathian ambassador Gr. Kael'th. The alien's image materialized on the screen, his expression a study in stoic composure. "Captain Tavers," he began, his voice a smooth rumble, "how may I assist you?" Rin forced a smile, the kind that made her cheeks ache. "Ambassador Gr. Kael'th, it seems our food has had an unintended effect on your delegation." I assure you this was not our intention. Gr. Kaelth nodded, the movement slow and deliberate. I appreciate your candor, Captain. We have noticed some discomfort among our people. Discomfort, Corin echoed under his breath. That's one way to put it. Doctor, Argus is working on a solution, Rin continued, ignoring her XO commentary. We're doing everything we can to rectify the situation. I understand, Gr. Kaelth replied, his voice as inscrutable as ever. We will endure. Our alliance is too valuable to jeopardize over such matters. Rin offered a nod of gratitude, though inwardly she was already calculating the odds of surviving yet another culinary catastrophe. Thank you, Ambassador. We appreciate your patience. As the comm ended, Rin sank into her chair, the leather creaking beneath her. Well, that went better than expected. Which part? Corin asked, still leaning against the console like he owned it. The part where they didn't declare war or the part where we didn't get spaced? Both, I suppose, Rin replied. But let's not test our luck. Keep an eye on our guests and make sure Argus gets everything he needs. Corin gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. I'll make sure our alien friends don't keel over before dinner. With the bridge returning to its usual state of ordered chaos, Rin took a moment to breathe, the weight of command a familiar, if unwelcome, presence. The stars beyond the viewport remained indifferent, their cold light illuminating the vast emptiness that was both their frontier and their prison. Another day in paradise, she muttered, the words carrying the hollow ring of truth. As the Iors dragged on, the ship's crew settled into the rhythm of survival. Every member played their part, from the engineers tweaking systems to the tacticians plotting courses through the vast unknown. It was a dance as old as time, a battle between the chaos of the cosmos and the fragile order they imposed upon it. In the lab, Dr. Argus worked with the intensity of a man who knew too well the stakes of failure. His hands moved deftly over the controls, manipulating data and coaxing secrets from their reluctant hosts. Each new discovery, each small victory, was tempered by the knowledge that the clock was ticking. Lyra Kale, never one to shy away from a challenge, had joined Argus in his efforts. Her grease-stained fingers moved with practiced ease, her mind a whir of calculations and possibilities. Together, they formed a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of the fragility of life. Any luck, Doc? Lyra asked, her voice cutting through the sterile silence of the lab. Argus grunted, his eyes never leaving the screen. Luck's got nothing to do with it, but we're close. Just need to tweak the formula. Lyra nodded, her hands busy assembling equipment for another round of tests. Just let me know when you need my help blowing something up. That's the last resort, Argus replied, a hint of humor threading through his gruff tone. Back on the bridge, Rin and Corin stood vigil, their eyes scanning the stars for any sign of trouble. The quiet was deceptive, a calm before the inevitable storm that seemed to follow them wherever they went. You ever wonder what it would be like to just stop? Corin asked, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the ship. Stop what? Rin replied, though she already knew the answer. Everything. The running, the fighting, the endless dance with death. Rin considered his words, the weight of them settling over her like a shroud. Sometimes, but stopping's not in our nature, is it? We're too stubborn to quit, Corin chuckled, a sound tinged with resigned acceptance. Yeah, that's us, stubborn till the bitter end. They lapsed into silence once more, the stars their only companions in the vast, indifferent void. Whatever the future held, they would face it together against all odds, in defiance of a universe that seemed determined to swallow them whole. Because in the end, survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about finding meaning in the struggle, about laughing in the face of despair, and about forging bonds that could weather any storm. It was about being human in all its flawed, irreverent glory. And as far as Rin was concerned, that was enough, for now. To stubbornness, Rin said softly, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. Corin echoed her words, his voice a quiet promise. To stubbornness and whatever madness comes next. And with that, they turned their eyes back to the endless expanse, ready to face another day in the unforgiving vastness of space. Captain Rin Tavers sat at the mess hall table, poking at her unidentifiable meal paste with the end of a fork as if it might bite back. If she hadn't already known it was food, she might have called security. With a sigh, she pushed it away and stood up, stretching her arms above her head and feeling the pop of her spine like a string of firecrackers. "Still trying to make peace with your lunch, Captain." Lieutenant Corin Shaw's voice brought her back to the reality of another grim day aboard the Aegis. "Negotiations are at a standstill," Rin replied, straightening her uniform. "But I'm confident in a mutually beneficial ceasefire." She glanced around the mess hall, noting the pallor of her crew, an endless parade of tired faces and hollow eyes, the look of people who hadn't tasted real coffee in weeks. Corin joined her, leaning on the table with the casual grace of a man who'd mastered the art of looking busy. "You know, we could always jettison the whole lot and claim ignorance." "Tempting," Rin said with a wry smile. "But Argus would probably string us up by our own entrails. Besides, our guests might take exception to being spaced." Corin nodded, glancing meaningfully at the intercom. "Speaking of our guests, they seemed remarkably composed during our last chat." "Stoicism in the face of gastrointestinal Armageddon," Rin said. "If nothing else, they're resilient." "Well, I suppose that's one way to bond," Corin offered, "over shared misery." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Ensign Harlow approached, her face a mask of grim determination. "Captain, we've got a situation." Rin turned, her expression shifting from exasperation to readiness. "What kind of situation, Harlow?" Jax Marrow's got a lead. "He thinks someone might be sabotaging our food supply," Harlow said, her voice low and urgent. Rin's eyes narrowed. "Sabotage, of course. Because things weren't complicated enough. He mentioned something about anomalous readings from the storage units," Harlow continued. "He's in the security office now, checking the logs." "Let's go, Corin," Rin said, moving towards the door with Corin in tow. "Time to see if someone on this ship really has it out for our digestive systems." They made their way through the ship's corridors, a labyrinth of dull metal and flickering lights. As they approached the security office, the tension in the air seemed to thicken, a palpable reminder of the stakes involved. Inside, Jax Marrow was hunched over a console, his fingers tapping a rhythm of impatience. A man of few words and even fewer expressions, Jax was known for seeing shadows in the dark. Maybe he'd finally found something lurking there. "Captain," Jax greeted them without looking up. "Been digging through the logs, found some discrepancies." "Discrepancies?" Rin echoed, crossing her arms. "You're gonna need to be more specific." Jax turned, his eyes meeting hers with the intensity of a man who'd stared into the abyss and found it wanting. "Someone's been accessing the storage units after IORs. Doesn't match with any scheduled maintenance or inventory checks." Corin folded his arms, leaning against the doorway. "And you think they're slipping something extra into the stew mix?" "Spicing things up with a hint of slow death. Could be," Jax replied, his tone as dry as the recycled air. "Or they're screwing with our inventory just because they can." "Any suspects?" Rin asked, her mind already racing through the possibilities. Jax shrugged, a gesture heavy with frustration. "Could be anyone. Someone on board's got a grudge or a really twisted sense of humor." "Great," Rin muttered. "Nothing like a bit of internal sabotage to spice up the diplomatic stakes. Any way to track who's behind it?" "Working on it," Jax said. "But it'll take time. Need to sift through the data, check surveillance if there's anything usable." Corin tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe we should let the good doctor know. His concoctions might have more than just Zorathian allergies to worry about." Rin nodded. "Good idea. Let's keep this contained for now. If word gets out, it could cause a panic." They left Jax to his work, the shadow of suspicion trailing them as they made their way to the infirmary. The hum of the ship surrounded them, a constant reminder of the fragile bubble of technology that separated them from the unforgiving void. "Sabotage," Corin mused as they walked. "It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Wonder what? Rin asked, glancing sideways at her XO. Whether this is just bad luck or if someone's genuinely got it in for us, Corin replied. You know what they say about paranoia and survival instincts. Yeah, Rin said quietly. Better to be paranoid than caught with your pants down. Back in the infirmary they found Dr. Argus pacing like a caged animal, his irritation as tangible as the antiseptic scent that permeated the room. Lyra Kale was there too, her expression one of focused determination as she tinkered with a piece of equipment that looked like it had seen better days. Doc, Rin greeted him, her tone businesslike. We might have a new wrinkle in our little food debacle. Argus paused, his eyes narrowing. A new wrinkle. I can hardly contain my excitement. We suspect sabotage, Rin said. Jax is working on it, but we thought you should know. There might be more to this than just an unfortunate culinary experiment. Argus grunted, his expression darkening. That would explain the anomalies I've been seeing in the tests. Thought it was just our equipment acting up. Is there anything we can do? Lyra asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. To fix the food, I mean. Argus and I have been working on a solution, Rin said. But with this new development, we need to be even more careful. Lyra nodded, her hands still moving with the surety of someone who thrived under pressure. I'll keep at it. If there's a way to make this work, we'll find it. Just be careful, Rin warned. I don't want any more casualties, accidental or otherwise. Understood, Argus replied, his gaze flicking to the monitors as if daring them to defy him. As they left the infirmary, Rin couldn't shake the feeling that their situation was unraveling faster than they could contain it. The walls seemed to close in around her, the weight of command growing heavier with each step. Sometimes I wonder, Corin said, breaking the silence as they walked. Maybe we're just cursed. Some cosmic force out there having a good laugh at our expense. Rin snorted, a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so bitter. If there's a cosmic joker out there, he's got a hell of a sense of humor. Later, as Rin sat in her quarters, staring at the empty expanse of space through the viewport, she tried to focus on the task at hand. But her mind kept drifting back to the thought of sabotage, the idea that someone among them was actively working against their survival. Trust was a fragile thing, she knew. Hard to earn, easy to lose. And in the cold depths of space, it was often the only thing keeping them from spiraling into chaos. A chime from her console broke the silence, pulling her back to the present. She tapped a button, bringing up the screen to see Jax's face, more grave than usual. Captain, he said without preamble, I found something. Her heart raced, a mix of anticipation and dread. Tell me. I managed to trace the access logs, Jax explained. Found a pattern. Someone's been bypassing the security protocols using a secondary access point. Rin's brow furrowed. And you know who it is? Not yet, Jax admitted. But we're close. I've narrowed it down to a handful of crew members. Just need a bit more time. Keep at it, Rin said, her voice firm. We need to nip this in the bud before it gets any worse. As the connection ended, she leaned back in her chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like a physical force. The stars beyond seemed to taunt her with their indifference, a reminder of the gulf between them and everything they once knew. But Rin was nothing if not stubborn, and as long as there was a chance to salvage this mess, she wasn't about to give up. To stubbornness, she murmured to herself, echoing the toast she'd made earlier. It was a promise, a vow to see this through no matter the odds. As she prepared to face yet another day in the endless void, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, a tiny ember in the darkness, refusing to be snuffed out. And that, more than anything, gave her the strength to keep fighting. The Aegis hummed its usual hymn of barely contained chaos, as Captain Rin Taver strode back into the mess hall, the metallic clinking of utensils against trays, a discordant chorus. The recycled air carried the tang of desperation, and the faint, ominous whiff of Zorathian delicacies that had turned from tempting to tormenting faster than you could say, peace mission. Rin found Corin Shaw leaning against a bulkhead, arms crossed, his face skewed in a grin that could only be described as mischievous. "How's our peacekeeping mission coming along?" he asked, as if discussing the weather rather than the looming threat of diplomatic disaster. "Oh, splendidly," Rin replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If we keep this up, we might just set a new record for fastest interstellar alliance to go up in flames." In the corner, a group of Zorathians looked particularly green around the gills, or whatever passed for gills on those blue-skinned saps. The food experiments that Lyra Kale had concocted were meant to bridge the culinary gap, but instead of bringing harmony, they'd brought the kind of discord you generally only saw in a cat being forced to take a bath. "You'd think they'd appreciate the effort," Corin mused, watching a Zorathian clutch its stomach with the intensity of a man contemplating life choices. "Appreciation is hardly the word I'd use," Rin said, observing the scene with a certain grim fascination. "It's like offering a drowning man a glass of water." Just then the intercom crackled to life, spitting static like a pissed-off snake. Dr. Tomlin Argus's voice came through, sounding as though he was delivering the eulogy at his own funeral. "Captain, we've got a situation in the infirmary. Our guests are reacting poorly to whatever it is we're calling food these days." Reacting poorly was putting it mildly, if the sound of retching in the background was any indication. Rin sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. "All right, Corin. Looks like we're playing diplomat and medic now. Why do I get the feeling that our next mission briefing is going to involve a lot of finger-pointing?" Corin asked as they made their way to the infirmary. "And probably fewer fingers. It's either that or an impromptu game of who can build a life raft the fastest," Rin replied. "And I'm fresh out of paddles." The infirmary was a hotbed of activity. Zorathians sprawled across cots, their faces a kaleidoscope of misery. Dr. Argus was wiping his hands with a towel that looked like it had seen more use than the ship's emergency brake. "Glad you could join the party," Argus said, tossing the towel aside. "Though I doubt you brought anything more than your cheery disposition." Rin cast a weary glance around the room. "Any chance this is just a bad case of food poisoning?" "Not unless food poisoning can suddenly become an airborne contagion," Argus replied. "But I'd bet my last pair of clean socks that this is something else." "Spectacular," Corin noted, examining a Zorathian who'd turned a particularly unflattering shade of purple. "And here I thought our species' main export was sarcasm." "Nope," Argus said dryly. "Turns out it's our ability to turn an already offensive situation into an international incident." As if on cue, Ensign Harlow burst into the room, a harried look on her face. "Captain, urgent message from Jax. He says he's found something big." Rin's heart did that unpleasant little skip it reserved for bad news. "Can't wait to hear it," she muttered, already heading for the door. "Corin, you're with me." Again, they reached the security office to find Jax Marrow hunched over a console, his face lit by the cold glow of the screen. He looked up, meeting Rin's gaze with a mix of triumph and concern. "Captain, I think we've got our saboteur," Jax said, tapping a few keys to bring up a display of logs and video feeds. "Or at least the start of a trail that'll lead us to them." Rin leaned in, scanning the data. "And who's our mystery troublemaker?" "Not who, but what," Jax corrected. "It seems there's an extremist faction within the Zorathians. They've been slipping something into their own food supplies, something designed to make them sick and scuttle peace talks." Corin gave a low whistle. "Talk about dedication. They're sabotaging themselves just to make sure we fail. Guess it's one way to ensure they don't have to start sharing resources with a bunch of hairless apes," Rin said. "Can you trace this back to anyone specific?" "Working on it," Jax replied. "But it's a tangled web. Whoever's behind this is good at covering their tracks." Rin straightened, determination stealing her spine. "Then we untangle it. We've got to stop this before the Zorathians decide they'd rather shoot first and ask questions later." As they left the office, Rin couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, desperately trying to broker peace, and the Zorathians were busy staging their own little internal rebellion. Sabotage, political intrigue, food poisoning. Corin listed off on his fingers as they walked. All we need now is an alien invasion and a mutiny, and we'll have hit the jackpot. Don't tempt fate, Rin warned. It's got a lousy sense of humor. Back in her quarters, Rin had just enough time to dump a cup of something resembling coffee down her throat before the intercom buzzed again. This time it was Lyra Kale, her voice tinged with the kind of urgency that suggested things were about to go from bad to worse. Captain, we need you in engineering. Now. Because nothing screams urgent like a potential reactor meltdown, Rin muttered to herself, heading out. In engineering, the air was thick with the tang of burned circuitry. Lyra and her team clustered around the main console like surgeons preparing for an operation they'd rather not perform. What's going on? Rin demanded, her patience wearing thinner than the ship's coffee substitute. We've got a power fluctuation, Lyra said, her fingers dancing over the controls. And not the usual kind that just makes the lights flicker and your toast a little too crispy. This one's got teeth. Of course it does, Rin replied. Anyone start praying? Only to the god of broken machinery, Lyra answered. But I doubt he's listening. The ship lurched, a groan reverberating through its bones. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the Aegis would keep itself together or decide that today was a good day to disintegrate. Anyone thinking what I'm thinking? Corin asked, gripping a nearby railing as though it might offer more stability than his current reality. That we're riding a very expensive coffin straight into a cosmic joke of our own making, Rin replied. Exactly. The lights flickered ominously, and for a moment, Rin imagined she could hear the disapproving sigh of every captain who'd managed to keep their ship in one piece before her. All right, Lyra, Rin said, her voice cutting through the tension like a cleaver through bone. What do we need to do to get this ship back in line? Working on a bypass, Lyra replied, a bead of sweat tracing a path down her temple. But it's going to take time, and a miracle wouldn't hurt. Well, Rin said, leaning over to peer at the console. Let me know if you need someone to start handing out last rites. With a nod of determination, Lyra dove back into her work, the rest of the team following her lead. Rin and Corin watched, the weight of command hanging heavy in the air. Remind me again why we signed up for this, Corin asked, his voice a blend of resignation and dry humor. I think it was something about seeing the stars and making a difference, Rin replied. But it's hard to remember when you're knee-deep in crisis. Corin chuckled, a sound that held more than a hint of gallows humor. Here's to making a difference. Even if that difference is just adding more fuel to the cosmic dumpster fire. The hours stretched on, time marked only by the ticking of the console and the occasional shudder of the ship as Lyra and her team worked against the clock. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled by, cold and eternal and utterly indifferent to the struggles of the tiny ship and its beleaguered crew. Finally, with a triumphant shout, Lyra stepped back from the console, her face smeared with grease and satisfaction. Got it, she exclaimed. We're stable for now. Rin heaved a sigh of relief, feeling a knot of tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying begin to unwind. Good work, Lyra. I knew you could do it. Lyra wiped her hands on her jumpsuit, her grin wide and genuine. Glad to be of service, Captain. Just try not to break anything else for at least a few hours, yeah? We'll do our best, Rin promised, though she knew in the pit of her stomach that peace would be short-lived. The saboteurs were still out there, and the Zorathians were one bad meal away from declaring war, or worse, suing for peace and leaving humanity to deal with the fallout. As they made their way back to the bridge, Rin couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. Battle-hardened by crisis and tempered by adversity, she and her crew were still standing, still fighting. And in the grand scheme of things, that was something worth holding onto. So she squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. Because in the vast, uncaring depths of space, sometimes all you had was the will to keep going. Even if it meant laughing in the face of disaster. The Aegis might not have been the most luxurious ship in the fleet, but when it came to drama, it was a five-star establishment. Rin Taver stood before the Zorathian leaders, A motley crew if ever there was one, trying to maintain a semblance of decorum. The room was a study in contrasts. Polished silver uniforms and intricate scales juxtaposed with the worn interiors of a ship that had seen better days. The air itself seemed to carry the weight of too many unsaid words and a strong undercurrent of recycled chicken. Let me get this straight. One of the Zorathian leaders, Ambassador Zrach, spoke, his tone dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for unpaid taxes and unsolicited advice. You're saying members of our own delegation have sabotaged the peace talks by poisoning themselves. Yeah, that about sums it up, Rin replied, folding her arms. Not exactly a strategy I'd recommend, but hey, who am I to judge? She had just thrown a grenade into a room and was now watching to see if it exploded or fizzled out like a cheap firework. The Zorathians exchanged glances, their scales shifting colors in a way that Rin had learned was either irritation or indigestion. Hard to tell with these guys. Ambassador Zrach leaned back, the chair protesting under the strain. And you have proof of this, Rin nodded to Jax Marrow, who hit a few keys on his portable console, producing a hologram that flickered to life in the center of the room. It showed grainy footage, like a low-budget spy thriller, of a Zorathian slipping something into a food container with all the subtlety of a first-time pickpocket. Now I'm no expert on intergalactic sabotage, Rin said, her voice wry, but that doesn't look like your average culinary seasoning. Zrach watched the footage, his expression inscrutable. Behind him, his aides murmured, probably discussing whether they'd need to start their CV again. The ambassador's scales darkened, a sure sign of contemplation or a rash, but Rin was betting on the former. This is concerning, Zrach admitted, his voice carrying the weight of a man who just discovered his pants were on fire. We had no knowledge of this faction's intent. Well, now that we're all on the same page and no one's setting fire to the diplomatic rulebook, maybe we can work together to fix it, Rin suggested. Unless you prefer to go back to the point fingers and shoot method. The ambassador let out a sound that might have been a sigh. It was either that or his attempts at a terrestrial laugh, which were terrifying enough to make horror movies look like romantic comedies. Very well, Zrach said, his voice a reluctant growl. We will cooperate with your crew to root out these extremists. There was a collective exhale among the Zorathians. Rin figured it was either relief or the aftermath of their previous culinary escapades. Fantastic, Rin said, clapping her hands together. Welcome to the team. Now let's get to work before someone decides to escalate this from a food fight to a firefight. As she turned to leave, she caught Corin's eye. He gave her a nod, his usual smirk replaced by something that almost resembled approval. Or maybe he was just hungry. Back in engineering, Lyra Kale stood over a mess of cables and blinking lights, her trusty team of tech wizards buzzing around her like moths to a particularly hazardous flame. The room hummed with a nervous energy, the kind that usually precedes either a breakthrough or an electrical fire. Rin made her way in, her entrance causing a ripple of half-hearted salutes and distracted nods. Lyra, please tell me you've got something other than bad news, she said, leaning against a console. Lyra looked up, a smudge of grease across her forehead like a war paint stripe. Oh, I've got something all right, she said, waving a hand at a cluster of what looked like tiny metallic spiders scuttling across the workbench. Nanotechnology. Rin raised an eyebrow. Are those nanobots? Lyra confirmed, her eyes glinting with the fervor of someone who spent too much time around radioactive isotopes. We can program them to alter food at molecular level, make Zorathian food safe for humans and vice versa. Kind of like a culinary peace treaty, Rin mused, watching the tiny bots with equal parts fascination and a healthy dose of paranoia. And these little guys won't turn our spaghetti into a sentient life form, right? Only if you ask them nicely, Lyra joked. But seriously, they've been tested. On non-essential personnel, of course. Well, now I know why Jenkins has been avoiding me, Rin replied dryly. But if this works, we might just have something to keep everyone from trying to kill each other over the dinner table. Lyra nodded, her grin wide and manic. We're still fine-tuning, but I think we can have a working prototype ready soon. Assuming nothing explodes. Fantastic, Rin said, with more enthusiasm than she felt. Keep me posted. And maybe tell Jenkins he can come out of hiding. With a nod, Lyra returned to her work, her team buzzing around her like a hive of caffeinated bees. Rin left them to it, her mind already 3 steps ahead, plotting how to present this to the Zorathians without giving them a reason to bolt for the nearest airlock. Out in the corridor, Corin caught up with her, matching her stride with the ease of someone who'd spent too many years in the same trenches. So, what's next on the itinerary? Alien therapy sessions or nanobot culinary school? Neither, Rin replied, her tone brisk. We need to make sure our Zorathian friends don't start seeing red anytime someone offers them a fork. Corin chuckled. Good luck with that. They're about as agreeable as a brick wall with opinions. I'm counting on their self-preservation instinct to win out, Rin said. It's either this, or someone's getting a visit from a very angry ambassador with a grudge and terrible taste in snacks. They reached the bridge, the heartbeat of the Aegis, with its constant hum of activity and an air that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. The crew snapped to attention as Rin and Corin entered, though the casual slump of their shoulders suggested they were already thinking about the next crisis. All right, listen up, Rin announced, planting herself in the center of the room where she could be both seen and ignored in equal measure. We're working on a solution to the food problem. Lyra's got some nanotech magic in the works, so with any luck, we won't have to rely on the power of questionable cuisine to keep the peace. A few chuckles echoed around the room, though they were laced with an edge of skepticism that Rin couldn't entirely fault. After all, she was asking them to trust in the power of tiny robots to save them from intergalactic war. Just another day on the Aegis. Until then, I need everyone on high alert, Rin continued. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, report it immediately. We're in the business of not getting blown up, or sued. With that, she dismissed them, letting the crew return to their tasks with the kind of weary determination that came from knowing there was no one else who could save them but themselves. Corin lingered, his usual smirk back in place. So, what do you think? Will the Zorathians play nice now that they've got their own mess to clean up? They'd better, Rin replied, her tone firm. Because if they don't, we're going to have a lot more than indigestion to worry about. Corin chuckled again, a sound that held more understanding than amusement. Here's hoping these nanobots are the peacekeepers we've been looking for. Because I'm pretty sure negotiating with a stomach ache wasn't in the mission briefing. They both knew the stakes were high, the consequences dire if their plans fell through. But in the vast, uncaring void of space, hope was sometimes all you had. Well, hope and a crew too stubborn to give up. As she watched the stars slip past the viewport, Rin felt a flicker of optimism worm its way into her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they'd pull this off. They'd bridge the divide, forge something lasting in the chaos. And if they didn't, well, at least they'd go down fighting. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human, to keep laughing in the face of disaster, to keep reaching for the stars even when they seemed impossibly far away. The Aegis was alive with the hum of barely contained chaos, a symphony of nervous chatter and the occasional shouted command. It was a place where optimism went to die, but strangely enough, that was what made it feel like home. Rin Tavers strode through the corridors with a confidence that was 1 part genuine and 3 parts bravado. After all, what was space diplomacy without a healthy dose of pretending you weren't about to be vaporized? She found Corin Shaw in the mess hall, staring at a plate of something that might have once been nutritious. I see the culinary ceasefire paste is still a work in progress, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Corin poked at his meal with all the excitement of a man defusing a bomb. If I didn't know better, I'd say Lyra was trying to kill us, slowly but effectively, Rin chuckled. Give her some credit, at least it's not fighting back today. Yet, he replied, casting a wary glance at his plate as though expecting it to sprout legs and make a run for it. With a smirk, Rin changed the subject. How's the morale out here? Still circling the drain, or have we upgraded to abandon hope all ye who enter? Somewhere in between. Though if things don't improve, I might start drinking my own engine coolant, Corin said, half seriously. Well, hold off on that. I've got news that might just save us from culinary seppuku, Rin said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Lyra thinks she's cracked it. The nanotech solution. Corin perked up, his interest piqued. You mean those creepy little robots she's been tinkering with, the very same. She says they can make our food safe for the Zorathians and they're safe for us. No more diplomatic incidents involving digestive systems. Well, color me impressed, and slightly terrified. You sure they won't decide to stage a revolution and overthrow us? Corin asked, only half joking. Only if you tell them about your engine coolant idea, Rin said deadpan. Corin laughed, a genuine sound that was all too rare on the Aegis lately. All right, Captain, what's the plan? We test it. Carefully, Rin replied. I've already volunteered Jenkins. He's got a stomach like a black hole. If he doesn't explode, we're good to go, Corin snorted. Poor bastard, better him than us, Rin said with a shrug. If it works, we'll present it to the Zorathians as our peace offering. Show them we're serious about this alliance. And if it doesn't, we'll just have to hope Jenkins has good insurance, Rin replied, standing up. Come on, let's go see if Lyra's miracle workers can pull this off. They left the mess hall, navigating the ship's narrow corridors with the ease of long-time residents. The Aegis wasn't much to look at, more rust than glam, but it was theirs. And for all its faults, it had a certain scrappy charm that almost made up for the lack of working coffee makers. In engineering, Lyra Kale was in her element, surrounded by a sea of cables and blinking lights. Her team was busy, each member deep in their own task, speaking a language of techno-babble that was incomprehensible to outsiders but made perfect sense to them. Captain, Lyra said, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of a mad scientist on the brink of a breakthrough. You're just in time. Our nanobots are ready for their debut performance. Great, Rin said, clapping her hands together. Where's Jenkins? Right here, Captain, piped up Jenkins, a wiry crewman with mismatched socks and a perpetually bewildered expression. He was what could be charitably described as adventurous when it came to new experiences, mainly because he never seemed to entirely grasp the potential consequences. Jenkins, my brave volunteer, Rin said with mock solemnity. Ready to test the future of intergalactic cuisine, Jenkins gave a lopsided grin. Bring it on. Lyra handed him a small, nondescript dish. It looked innocuous enough, like something you'd find in a mid-range space diner, but appearances were deceiving, and Rin knew that better than most. Remember, Jenkins, Lyra said, her tone both reassuring and slightly ominous. This is cutting-edge tech. We're talking Nobel Prize material if it works. And if it doesn't? Jenkins asked, echoing Corin's earlier question. Then you'll have the honor of being the first to test our medical bay's new system, Lyra replied brightly. Jenkins hesitated for a moment but then shrugged and took a bite. The room held its collective breath, a dozen pairs of eyes watching for any sign of imminent disaster. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and then broke into a wide smile. Not bad. Tastes like chicken. Lyra let out a whoop of triumph and the room erupted into cheers. Rin felt a weight lift off her shoulders, one she hadn't even realized she was carrying. This was it, their ticket to peace. Or at the very least a temporary ceasefire. Well, I'll be damned, Corin said, looking genuinely impressed. Looks like we won't have to resort to Plan B after all, and Plan B was. Rin asked, raising an eyebrow. Diplomatic immunity, with a side of heavy artillery. Rin shook her head, though she couldn't help but smile. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Lyra, get this prepped for presentation. We'll show the Zorathians what humans can do when we're not busy trying to kill each other over dinner. Lyra nodded, practically vibrating with excitement. On it, Captain. We'll make history yet. As Rin and Corin made their way back to the bridge, the mood on the ship seemed lighter, buoyed by the possibility of real progress. It was a fragile hope, but it was hope nonetheless. And sometimes that was enough. Back on the bridge, the crew was abuzz with the news. The message had spread like wildfire, and Rin could see the change in their demeanor. Less tension, more optimism. It was like watching the sun break through a storm, if you were into that kind of poetic nonsense. "All right, team," Rin said, calling for attention. "We've got our solution. Now we just need to convince the Zorathians to play ball." A chorus of affirmatives met her declaration, and Rin felt a surge of pride for her ragtag crew. They might not be the most disciplined bunch, but they were hers, and they were damn good at what they did. Ambassador Zirach arrived shortly afterwards, accompanied by his entourage of Zorathians who looked about as pleased as someone who just discovered their spaceship had been booted for overdue parking fines. "Captain Tavers," Zirach said, his voice as smooth as broken glass. "I trust you have news for us." Rin nodded, gesturing for Lyra to join them. "Ambassador, we've developed a solution to our little food conundrum. It's a technological breakthrough that allows us to safely consume each other's meals without the risk of, well, unexpected consequences." Zirach's scales shifted in a kaleidoscope of colors, a visual cacophony of skepticism and curiosity. "And you're confident in this solution?" "We've tested it," Rin replied, with a confidence she hoped wasn't misplaced. "And our crew member lived to tell the tale." "Well, that's reassuring," Zirach said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. "I suppose you wish to demonstrate this technology." Lyra stepped forward, holding a small dish prepared by the nanobots. "With your permission, Ambassador, we'd like to perform a demonstration. It's perfectly safe." Zirach considered for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Proceed." Lyra activated the nanobots, and they watched as the dish transformed before their eyes, the molecular structure rearranging itself into something more palatable for Zorathian taste buds. It was like watching science fiction become science fact, and Rin couldn't help but feel a flicker of awe. Zirach accepted the dish with a cautious nod, taking a tentative bite. The room was silent, every breath held as they awaited his verdict. His scales flickered through a spectrum of colors, finally settling on a shade that Rin had come to associate with guarded approval. "Interesting," he said, his voice giving nothing away. "It appears your technology is effective." Rin let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We believe this could be the first step towards a more stable alliance. A way to bridge our cultural differences." Zirach considered her words, his gaze shifting between Rin, Lyra, and Corin. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Captain. We will consider this proposal. It would seem that human ingenuity has surprised us once again." "Surprise is what we do best," Rin replied with a grin, though she was careful to keep it respectful. "We look forward to working with you on this." As Zirach and his aides departed, Rin felt a sense of relief wash over her. They'd done it, or at least, they'd taken the first step. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like they were going in the right direction. Corin clapped her on the shoulder, his usual smirk softened to something almost genuine. "Well, Captain, looks like you've brokered peace with nothing more than a science experiment and a whole lot of luck." Rin chuckled, feeling the tension of the past few days begin to ebb away. "Luck and a crew that refuses to quit. I'd call that a win." The Aegis continued its journey through the stars, the vast, uncaring void suddenly feeling a little less daunting. They'd faced down the odds and come out on top, proving once again that humans were nothing if not resourceful. And as Rin watched the stars blur past the viewport, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what they'd accomplished. They might not be perfect, but they were human. And in the end, maybe that was enough. As the Aegis sailed through the inky blackness, the crew buzzed with a rare sense of triumph. The corridors were filled with the kind of chatter that hadn't been heard since before the peace mission began, a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. The Zorathians had actually agreed to consider their proposal, which was about as likely as finding a working coffee maker aboard the ship. Captain Rin Tavers leaned against the railing on the bridge, surveying her crew with a sardonic smile. "Well, folks, looks like we've managed to not completely cock this up. Who'd have thought? Certainly not the Zorathians," Corin Shaw quipped, leaning beside her. "I think they expected us to implode halfway through dinner. Don't jinx it, Shaw. I'm still half expecting to wake up and find this was all a caffeine-deprived hallucination. If it is, it's a damn good one." Even the Zorathian scales looked almost happy, or indigested, Rin added, smirking. "Hard to tell with them," Corin chuckled. "True. Now what's next on our agenda? Convincing them to trade decent food or actual coffee?" Rin rolled her eyes. "I think saving the galaxy from a culinary disaster is enough for one day. Let's not push our luck." From the console, Ensign Harlow piped up, "Captain Doctor Tomlin Argus wants a word in the infirmary. Says it's urgent." Rin groaned, half expecting this to be about the infirmary's latest escapades with Zorathian delicacies. "Can a captain have one damn day without something urgent?" "Not unless you want to be captain of a cruise ship," Corin teased. "Don't tempt me." Rin straightened up, her expression switching to command mode. "Harlow, you have the bridge." "Corin, let's see what Dr. Argus has stirred up this time." As they made their way to the infirmary, Rin couldn't help but muse aloud. "You think maybe we should have just gone with your plan B?" "Oh, you mean the one involving diplomatic immunity and heavy artillery?" "Tempting, but I doubt even our best artillery could fix Zorathian cuisine." "True. Though at least it would have been a clean break." The infirmary was, unsurprisingly, a chaos of beeping machinery and Dr. Argus looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His usual demeanor of weary exasperation was dialed up to 11. "Captain, Lieutenant," he greeted, eyes barely leaving his screens. "I have good news and bad news. Let's start with the good news." "I might actually sleep tonight," Rin replied. "Our infirmary systems have finally adapted to the nanobot protocols. We're fully capable of handling any cross-species food incidents." "Fantastic," Corin said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure the Zorathians will be thrilled to hear we've finally figured out how not to poison ourselves." "And the bad news?" Rin asked, bracing herself. Dr. Argus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The Zorathian delicacies appear to have a side effect. They cause an odd allergic reaction, temporary but inconvenient." "Inconvenient how?" Rin asked, wary of his pause. "Well, let's just say it involves a lot of itching, and possibly more sneezing than is dignified." Corin stifled a laugh. "So, our big diplomatic breakthrough comes with a side of intergalactic hay fever." "Precisely," Argus said, deadpan. "I'd advise avoiding contact with their dishes unless you enjoy feeling like a walking rash. We'll make sure to pass on the message," Rin said with a sigh. "Add this to the list of things we'll have to negotiate." As they left the infirmary, Corin shook his head in amusement. "Itching and sneezing. Sounds like a hell of a trade agreement. Welcome to space diplomacy," Rin replied dryly. "Where the stakes are life, death, and extreme discomfort." They returned to the bridge, where the atmosphere was still buoyant despite the latest developments. It seemed that even the prospect of alien-induced allergies couldn't dampen the crew's spirits. "All right, everyone," Rin announced, rallying her crew. "We've got a long way to go before our Zorathian friends are fully on board. So let's keep things running smoothly and avoid any unnecessary sneezing fits." Lyra Kale, still riding high on her nanotech triumph, approached with an expression that was equal parts excitement and exhaustion. "Captain, we've got the tech locked down. I think we're ready for the next phase of negotiations." "Good to hear," Rin said. "We'll need all the leverage we can get." Lyra nodded, her enthusiasm undiminished. "And maybe this time we can convince them to share something a bit less itchy." "One step at a time, Lyra," Rin said with a chuckle. "For now, let's focus on proving we're more than just a bunch of itchy primates." As Lyra returned to her work, Rin took a moment to survey her ragtag crew, the same group of misfits who had somehow managed to pull off a minor miracle. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. And against all odds, they were on the brink of something great. "Captain," Ensign Harlow called out, reeling her back from her thoughts. "Incoming message from the Zorathians. Ambassador Zrach wants to discuss the next steps." Rin exchanged a glance with Corin, who shrugged. "Guess it's time to put on our diplomatic hats again." "Right," Rin said, squaring her shoulders. "Patch them through, Harlow." The screen flickered to life, revealing Ambassador Zrach and his entourage. His scales had settled into a color that Rin liked to imagine translated to amused tolerance. "Captain Tavers," Zrach greeted with that glass-smooth voice. "I hope this day finds you well as can be expected, Ambassador," Rin replied. "I hear you're interested in discussing our next steps." "Indeed. Your proposal has intrigued us. We are, however, concerned about certain side effects of your culinary technology." Rin exchanged a knowing look with Corin, who coughed to hide a laugh. "Yes, we're aware of the itching." Zrach's scales shifted slightly, perhaps into mildly amused. "A minor inconvenience, I'm sure. Still, we'd like assurances that these effects are temporary and non-threatening." "Absolutely, Ambassador," Rin assured. "Dr. Argus has confirmed that while irritating, these reactions are short-lived and harmless." "Then we are willing to proceed with further negotiations," Zrach said, his tone businesslike. "We see potential in this alliance, Captain Tavers, and in your crew." Rin felt a flicker of pride at his words. "Thank you, Ambassador. We're eager to see where this partnership can lead." "Very well. We shall begin preparations for a formal agreement. You will be contacted with the details shortly." As the transmission ended, a cheer went up on the bridge. It was a sound that spoke of relief and a cautious optimism that hadn't been felt in far too long. "Looks like we're in the big leagues now," Corin said, unable to hide his grin. Rin nodded, a mix of satisfaction and apprehension swirling within her. "Yeah, and all it took was a little bit of ingenuity, a lot of luck, and the willingness to risk excessive itchiness." As the crew celebrated, Rin allowed herself a moment to reflect. They'd come a long way from those first disastrous attempts at diplomacy. Somehow, against all odds, they'd found a way to bridge the vast chasm between their species. "Here's to future collaborations with the Zorathians," she said, raising an imaginary glass. "May they be as fruitful as they are itchy." Corin joined her in the toast, a sly smile on his face. "And here's to dealing with whatever madness comes next. Because we both know it's only a matter of time." Rin laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Agreed. But at least we'll face it together." "It's a start, right?" The Aegis continued its journey through the stars, a scrappy testament to human tenacity and the power of a little creative problem-solving. And as Rin watched the stars streak past, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the cusp of something extraordinary. They were human, after all. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was making the impossible seem almost routine.